Reporting on the box office in The Little Mermaid is, well, questionable if at best. Never mind, we'll just scrap that and start over. Way to screw up an English idiom there, Pro. Here we go, at the 20-second mark. Reporting on the box office for The Little Mermaid is questionable at best. Media outlets are, well, they're saying it's a fantastic success, a splash, if you will. In reality, it's missing the projections that it had just days ago. That's not to say that it's a flop. It is to say that The Little Mermaid has an uphill climb. And, well, with her legs being rather brand new, that could be a tall order. At the same time, this is a Cues from You video. That's right, we're taking questions from members, and they have lots and lots of questions about Star Wars, many of them quite fantastic. All right, folks, happy Memorial Day weekend. It is wonderful to have all of you joining us today. We love doing these videos, and you seem to love them right back. When we first began doing these Cues from You, we were not sure how they would be received by just, everybody on YouTube. But they've gone tremendously well, so we're so happy and pleased with that. We trust our members. We give them the seat to the steering wheel, and we let them take this thing away. And so we're happy to answer these questions from all of you. Joining me to help in that endeavor is Lauren Connor of thatparkplace.com. And as we say so many times, Lauren is an encyclopedia incarnate when it comes to all things, not just Star Wars we've discovered, but just Lucasfilm in general. Lauren, welcome back to the channel.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Lauren, we're going to be getting into these issues about Star Wars, many questions about Star Wars, and I suspect that comes on the heels of all of this bad news for Kathleen Kennedy. But before we do, we need to get into the issues of The Little Mermaid and the box office. So let's read this quickly and give everybody my take and your take on what's going on here. This from Variety yesterday. Box office Little Mermaid swimming to #1 with 38 million opening day. Here's what it says. Disney's live-action Little Mermaid is making quite the splash at the domestic box office this weekend with an opening day total of $38 million. The fantasy, which is opening in 4,320 theaters, is expected to gross between $120 million and $130 million over the 4-day Memorial Day weekend. And so this is being presented as a huge success. The problem is, and this is something that they don't report, but they should, the problem is that this film was exceedingly costly to make. I know we sound like we're on repeat so many times saying this, but this is the situation Disney has put themselves in. This movie needs to make $800 million to make a profit. It is significantly below other remakes such as Lion King and Beauty and the Beast. It is tracking above Aladdin from 2019 in terms of just the money amount. But the problem here is that because of inflation in movie ticket prices, which far outstrips our already historic inflation, this is probably a decrease of about 25% in audience attendance for this movie versus Aladdin. And again, it needs to get to 800 million, and it is going to face very stiff competition in the month of June. Now, I also want to bring this up, this out of Box Office Pro, and we're simply trying to tell the truth. Now, put aside for a moment that I think that this is technically a very poorly crafted film. That's not to criticize the actors or actresses involved. It's simply to say that the director, the writers, the costume designers, the CGI artists, this film did not come together in a cohesive manner. But if you look here on Box Office Pro, you can see that as recently as May 24th, this film was being predicted at 135 minimum, and above 140 was really what they were looking at. So they're not saying, by the way, this film is dropping in terms of where we thought it would be. And that's a real problem. And it's a shame that they don't tell these kinds of things because, again, the media attempts to shape the narrative, frame it in the way that is most beneficial to Disney. You can't totally blame them because, well, they're covering an industry that needs to succeed in order for them to have a job. So they have some inherent bias in the fact that it's self-preservation for them to praise some of these big films. They can't have every single thing flop or else they'll have nothing to cover. So, Lauren, any thoughts on that before we hop into these cues from you?
Well, I was a little bit shocked. I haven't really been paying attention to this movie because I'm not the target audience. That's the first time I've heard that it needs to make $800 million to net a profit. How did that happen?
So this film ballooned up to, I believe, $250 million for a production budget. That's largely due to the pandemic. Now that has to do. It's very unlucky in terms of this film because this film actually had all of its pre-production done, and just as they were preparing to go into production, that's when everything shut down. So very unfortunate timing. It's not totally on the makers of the film. Then on top of that, we suspect that they've got somewhere in the vicinity of a $150 million marketing campaign behind it. And that's
Sure.
what you would expect. The other thing, too, is if you were to look at which of the Disney cartoons, any of the feature length cartoons, which would be the most expensive to remake, it's got to be this one. I mean, if they wanted to do some things with Tarzan, you could see Tarzan being very expensive to do. But honestly, having doing underwater scenes where you're going to have these characters flipping and turning with fins on the back, that's going to require extensive CGI. And in this case, one of the reasons that it failed so miserably in terms of just being a technical achievement, I mean, it achieves nothing technically. One of the reasons for that is because they went with a strategy of taking these actors' faces and implanting them onto CGI bodies. And then
Right.
also you've got the issue of what does it look like for a human to speak underwater, because humans don't speak underwater. And it looks very bizarre if they try to speak underwater. I mean, you can imagine what that would look like in reality. And so the decision that came down was to strip out what makes water look like water, and therefore it won't look so bizarre. The problem there is that you're essentially watching these people float in air that's supposed to be water, but looks nothing like water. And then that's just an uncanny valley of uncanny valleys. So all
Yeah,
of it bizarre.
I was going to mention that from your video earlier this week. I did watch your review, and seeing what the Mer people looked like was definitely in the uncanny valley, and so I could see that working against the picture. One of the things I didn't get a sense of, though, is that I did hear you say that they improved the character of Prince Eric. They gave him a little bit of a backstory. They've tried to beef that up. Two things I wasn't really clear on. One is, how was the chemistry between Ariel and Prince Eric? Did that work?
Honestly, quite good. That they did very well on, and I hope people understand. I try to call balls and strikes, honestly. Um, I don't think that Halle Bailey is a terrific actress, but I think she did her very best with this movie, and I do think that they were able to create a believable chemistry out of the characters of Ariel and Prince Eric.
So the second question that I had is, leaving Aquafina aside, how was the music?
It's not good. Um, so the way to determine that is for the original songs. If you were to play play the new song, then play the original song directly after it, and it is remarkable how much better the original songs are, and that just comes down to vocal talent. Jodie Benson is one of the greatest singers in film history. Part of Your World is incredible, and going back and actually listening to her original vocals, she was awesome. Um,
So
then you've got the Under the Sea, and his name escapes me right now. The guy who played Sebastian originally, just a tour de force in terms of vocal abilities. Same thing from Pat Carroll playing Ursula. And these individuals, so Halle Bailey is a good singer, but she is not top tier Broadway good. She's good, but she's not that good. And Melissa McCarthy is doing her best, but she's not that good. And the guy who plays Sebastian is just not good.
So the reason I was coming at it this way is, again, not being the target audience. I'm trying to think of who the target audience is. I know that it's probably going to be the mothers of children who saw this when it originally came out in theaters as an animated feature, but it's also going to be their daughters. So you're looking at 7 to 9 year old girls, probably. And I'm trying to think of this from the standpoint of, if these were little girls that were watching this movie that had never seen the animated movie, and this was their only exposure to The Little Mermaid, the soundtrack could potentially rescue the film if it was good. if you didn't have the original music to compare it to, do you think that little girls are going to want to listen to the soundtrack?
If you took away the original film, and let's say that it never existed, this is the first time we've ever seen The Little Mermaid. It's
Mhm.
the first rendition of it on the big screen. I think this would come across as an extremely weird movie, and it would quickly die on the vine. I think it's stranger on its own than Neverending Story, and at the same time less memorable.
Oh,
There are so many strange, weird things that just come across as being either inept or uncaring. I'll give you an example. There's a scene early on where the mer people are swimming towards the mer people castle, and that's a scene from the cartoon. Now they're in the water, and they're deep in the water, and the camera has gone to the depths of the ocean to get here. And behind that castle is a giant source of light, which appears to be the sun. But the sun can't be inside the ocean. And I don't know why someone didn't say, hey, that can't exist. But some VFX studio out there just didn't get the memo. And so there's a giant ball of light in the ocean behind the castle. And it's just time after time after time of stuff like that where you go, who was supposed to be supervising this? Because, and I'll tell you this, Lauren, this is from the same guy who did the Mary Poppins sequel. And the Mary Poppins sequel was rather poorly received. Lin-Manuel Miranda in that movie, poorly received, although he's usually good. But this is just paralleled again. It's like Lin-Manuel Miranda suddenly can't write music anymore. He can't fit his stuff in. It is jarringly different than the original soundtrack. And when it appears, you go, this is not the same movie. And again, we have this situation where stuff just isn't connected in a cohesive way.
I know there was talk of alteration of the lyrics to try and modernize it to deal with today's sensibilities. Was that egregious? Was that something that also pulled you out?
No, because what they did was clever in that regard. For both of the songs that had their lyrics changed, they hid that by having the songs be interrupted by the movie in the middle of the song, and then that song would then pick itself back up after some action had occurred. And then they would also do a key change. And so that made you not notice that they had stripped out parts of the song.
Well, that's clever at least. It's less offensive than it could have been.
Definitely.
Um, but I guess based on what you're saying, it sounds like kind of like what you predicted. It's probably going to have a solid-ish opening weekend and then probably drop off after that.
I think it probably this is just me speculating right now. I'm not basing this off any projections out there, and I could be totally wrong. But I think that this film is looking at something like a $500 million worldwide. We'll see where that lands, but I think that's where it could go, and it's simply not enough. I think it's going to have a great first weekend, and then significant fall off as word of mouth is poor.
Okay, so let me ask you this question. Supposing that's the case, and if you're in the ballpark, say it makes $500,000, that's three hundred thousand
Well, five
dollars
hundred
less.
million.
Oh, sorry. Um, um, what do you think that the final take for the movie is going to be at the end?
You mean worldwide?
Yeah.
Oh, I think about $500 million. I think that's where we're going, and
Okay.
I'll show
So
you this one real quick. I'm going to show you why I think that. So if we go to Rotten Tomatoes, now there is some real trickery afoot here. Let's just take a look at this. On the tomatometer, you can see that all critics are at 67%. If we click on top critics, 46%. Now,
right.
now, how do you get that kind of disparity? Well, you get that kind of disparity because top critics have their jobs secured, so they can say whatever they actually believe. All critics, they need those premier access passes from Disney, so they're going to say whatever it takes. Here's the other cool thing about this. Check this out. What's the difference in the score down here? Well, it's very small, 6.4 out of 10 on average from the all critics. Top critics, 6.0 out of 10. So what does that mean to get that 20% difference in essentially in the score? Well, it means that the all critics are giving it the bare minimum to be reviewed as fresh. That's the binary system that Rotten Tomatoes uses. And so they're giving it the bare minimum so that they can get, they can say they give a positive review,
Right.
whereas the top critics don't care. Now, but it's paralleled with the audience. Check this out. And this is what's so funny. So, verified audience, this is a in my opinion, this is a very highly manipulated uh demographic. In fact, I don't take it at all to be meaningful. It's just used in my opinion as a filter system to create egregiously high audience scores. If we go to all audience, so that's everybody who just gave a review,
Ooh.
53%. So that's why I say I think the word of mouth here is going to just be bad as we continue forward.
So the question I was going to ask is, say that the final cum for this movie is $500 million when all is said and done. That
Right.
leaves it $300 million under what it needed to make for a profit. The
Sure.
next big Disney movie we've got coming out is Elemental. What happens after that?
Elemental is in a world of hurt. We're going to cover that Monday morning. So Memorial Day morning, we'll be covering Elemental. Lauren, you're welcome to come back for that video if you'd like. But reviews are now out for Elemental. The embargo is up, and it is being decimated in those reviews.
I'm not so much interested in the Elemental film itself. I'm more curious, what do you think this means for Disney? Because recently outlets have been sensing there's blood in the water. They're starting to get a little more pointed in how they're covering Disney. I can't imagine they can continue to ignore this.
So the media is doing it. Well, the media is beginning to realize they have to cover this to some degree. The media is not yet reporting just how low the emergency fund allegedly is for Disney. In other words, their operating assets, let's say, the capital that they have to sustain themselves should revenues go down. That's quite small. At the same time, the company has hit a 5-year low almost. It's tickling it. And I'm not giving financial advice, folks. Don't take any financial advice from me, please, nor from Lauren. Seek out your own financial advisor who is accredited, credentialed, and qualified, and whom you can trust for any kind of financial decisions. With that said, the Disney company is nearing a 5-year low in their stock price. That is making it exceedingly difficult to buy Hulu. And Comcast is now going after Disney. They're evaluating that the Hulu brand is now worth 70 plus $billion. We're talking about Fox level valuation on this. And Disney has to pay a third of it to get this thing. It's going to go now into arbitration, likely. And somebody is going to buy Hulu in 2024. And Disney, as we see it right now, doesn't have the money. They can go into debt, but it's a horrible time to go into debt because of interest rates and because of, well, we won't go into this, but the situation in Florida where they've been stripped of their ability to issue bonds so easily, it really puts them under the gun a little bit. So, but Lauren, let's get into the cues from you, and perhaps we'll venture back into some of that as well, some of these other topics, as these questions from our members bring us back into topics that are so awesome. So here it is. Of course, we do these once a week. Cues from you, and it says drop your questions and comments down below. And this is one of those perks of people having a tier 2 or higher level membership on the channel. We're talking about the profound level and up. Lauren, if you wouldn't mind, read this first question comment from Darth Apathy. We still love the name.
A bit of fantasy here. What if the Rey movie comes out and in it, Rey enters the world between worlds and she herself sees the point where a decision by Luke or by Han and Leia do something that causes Ben to become susceptible to dark influence? Sometime when our heroes are still at or near their prime, and Rey goes in to save the day by preventing it and thereby erasing the sequel trilogy bit, still being the one who saves everything or whatever. That combined with the apparently deliberate embarrassment of KK. Do
I
you
see
think
what
that
Darth Apathy is trying to do here. There is a needle that is attempted or being attempted to thread. Continue
Mhm.
on, Lauren.
Do you think that, or something like it, could save face for the important people while appeasing the fans, even those that demand an outright apology? On a 1 to 10, how far above a 2 might the chances of such occurring?
Lauren, I'll let you take the first stab at this, given that you, I'm sure, have a strong opinion about it, and your knowledge of Star Wars far exceeds my own.
Okay, so I will say this. I mentioned a while back that I had attempted to begin writing a version of what I thought could be an episode 10 with Rey and Grogu in it that would hopefully reset things in such a way that it would at least allow the audience to stomach it and move forward while doing a subtle retcon of the sequel trilogy. Um, it was not so much centering on the idea of Ben not being corrupted by the dark side. Rather, I wanted to take things in a slightly different direction and say that something had occurred that caused things to not play out the way that the Force itself would have deemed the correct path for destiny to take. Say something that some ability that some might see as unnatural. Let's put it that way, and that through that, Ray came to be, but Ray never should have come to be. And so, my idea for how you correct this is that there has to become an awareness of this thing that happened. That thing has to be undone. But you also work in some of what the sequel trilogy had to say, which was that um, I thought it was a hokey line, but one of them is that no one's ever really gone forever. And so the idea was that, look, um, there may be things that occurred that shouldn't have. There may be characters and situations that could exist. Take, for instance, like some of the planets, Takadana, Maz Kanata. Uh, if things change in a hypothetical future, that doesn't mean these characters didn't exist. It doesn't mean that they couldn't exist. And that could go for Ray as well. It just means that she wouldn't come to be in the way that she did in that sequel trilogy. And instead, she could go off and perhaps have a different destiny. I think prior to what we've seen coming out of Lucasfilm in the last few weeks, I thought something like that, maybe there was a way to thread that needle. Now I'm not sure you can even do that. I think disgust is at such an all time high with what's happened with Star Wars. I don't know that there's any way to salvage it. But if I were going to try and do something like that, you don't I would not want to put the thumb completely in the eye of people that actually do like the sequel trilogy. There are people that like it. And so I think if you were going to try and retcon the sequel trilogy, you can retcon the events, but you don't want to completely eliminate all of the characters because there are people that like those characters. That doesn't mean that their destinies and what happened with them in the movies had to be what happened in whatever that retcon is.
Well, I'm in a position of feeling a little bit whiplashed, and the whiplash I have is that I was taking fire from people who were criticizing, and not to a large scale, but criticizing me because I was saying that there's not going to be a big celebration or a retirement party or anything of that nature for Kathleen Kennedy at Star Wars Celebration, and that turned out to be true. And that came from sources who were just telling us that none of this exists. They're not going to do that. Then at the same time, I then weeks later, I've begun saying, by the way, now sources are saying that she probably will exit the studio in the next year. I suspect that she'll actually be quote unquote promoted to a legacy position. I don't think that she'll be embarrassed or walked out in any way. So I'm a little bit whiplash there, but based on my belief that Kathleen Kennedy is not long for Lucasfilm any longer, I think that how the Ray movie turns out, which I think that's an Iger initiative, and so I think that it will happen regardless of whether she's there or not. But I think the content of that film is so dependent on what happens with the writer's strike that I can't say what will happen right now. Because if the writer's strike continues to the point that Kathleen Kennedy has less time to impact that film and its production, then it's drastically different than if the writer's strike ends tomorrow and Kathleen Kennedy gets, let's say, 8 months of runtime, fiddling with it and determining what's going to be there and firing an entire team again and replacing them for her own benefit or what have you. So it's up in the air for me as to what the Ray movie will be. As long as Kathleen Kennedy has impact, though, I do not suspect in any way that she's going to do anything that would retcon or appease critics of the sequel trilogy.
I agree with that. I do have a slight disagreement with you, I think, although I'm not sure how much of a disagreement it really is. I guess one of the things I would ask is How far along in production do you think the Ray movie actually is? I don't think they have a script. I think they have concepts. Would you agree?
I think they have a skeletal outline, is my understanding. The gentleman, and I can't remember his name right now, who was the writer who exited Lindelof.
Mhm.
Lindelof, I think, it's been reported that when he left, all of what he had done was exited with him. I don't think that's true based on what I've heard. I think that a skeleton outline of what the film is remains, and that it will be then readjusted and refleshed out. Now, if Kathleen Kennedy leaves, and the writer's strike continues till just right about the time she leaves, who knows? I mean, they could delay this thing. They could put the Mandoverse movie ahead of it. They could bring in an all new team. There's no telling what could happen.
See, I'm looking at this from a slightly different angle. I'm looking at it from how much time does Iger have left?
Iger
I
has
think it's the end of
until
next year, isn't it?
November of
24?
2024. Yeah.
Okay. If that's the case, then it usually takes a year to 2 years to get fully into where you're shooting the movie. If somebody else is coming in, then I don't know that the Iger initiative actually matters. Usually, a new studio head comes in, they don't want to be attached to anything that the previous head was doing. Now, it depends on how far along in production they get. Like you're saying, the writer's strike is going to impact that. But based on the things that they have publicly said about this Ray movie, including questioning whether the galaxy even wants the Jedi to come back,
It's so bad. Well, we're
no,
we're questioning it. That's the audience who's questioning that. That's what we're saying. We're not sure we
no
want any of them to come back.
no studio head that comes in after Iger is going to allow that to happen. You will completely bury Star Wars. I think it's already. I think it may already be
Well,
there
Lauren,
anyway.
they were targeting 2025 for this film. The longer the writer's strike continues, the less likely it is they hit that 2025. I think that it's just unrealistic. I think that it's at least 2026,
I,
probably 27. And the farther it gets pushed out, the more I agree with you.
there's another thing I want to bring up here too, and that is Ray Stevenson's death,
Yes.
because he was going to be a major player in Ahsoka. Obviously, his scenes are already shot. I am assuming, based on the look of his character, that he's going to be a loose adaptation of the Yoris Sabaoth character from the Heir to the Empire novels. Maybe not. Could be totally wrong about that, but he at least has somewhat of the look. If so, I would expect him to be a major character in that movie as well, and he's no longer available.
Well,
And that's
that gets tricky too, because Disney has had very um, what would you say? They have been inconsistent in what they do after the death of an actor, whether they'll recast or not. And it's tricky to know what they'll do in this regard.
right. But no matter what they do, that's got to have sent them into a panic trying to figure it out. How do we salvage this? And so, honestly, I think that's another area where right now, the best thing they can do, the very best thing they can do, is tread water. Don't
No,
do
well,
anything right now.
I
Stop
hope
doing anything.
I hope they take your advice, and I know that you speak on the behalf of many Star Wars fans who would agree. Lucasfilm, this is our message to you. Don't do anything. Just stop. All right, Lauren, let's go to this next one. This from Jex Reffy.
Potential spoiler warning for Tears of the Kingdom. Spacing to put spoiler under, read more. There is something that has me a little confused about WDW's reports about the rumored Zelda park of Universal.
That's
It's
why we
clear
do these.
it's clear to me based on what was described that the theme park will be based loosely on the story of Ocarina of Time. That said, in my humble opinion, it is clear from the story of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom that Nintendo is executing a soft reboot of the Zelda franchise, specifically to get away from the split timeline theory.
So Lauren, let's pause there and let me clarify this. This is something that I have not talked about in any of the videos. I should have. There were quite a few things that I did not get to in the Zelda expansion for Islands of Adventure video that I did. One of the things that I've been told, and so much of this is so on point right now that I'm feeling very confident, is that this will not be based on any particular game inside the Zelda franchise, but rather that what they would like, and take this with a grain of salt, simply because when people are designing theme park elements, they shoot for the moon. And then that gets pared back by budget cuts and realistic expectations. And so you shoot for the moon, you go for 100%. What would be just, incredible and awe-inspiring and unbelievably good. And then you get like 20 to 30% of that and you call that a success. In the ideal world, what has been pitched, I am told, is that this would be sort of its own little game, and that there would be little missions inside this land, this expansion for you to go do, and that, for example, the Poseidon's Fury, I am told, would be retrofitted, changed, refurbished into being an amalgamation of several different temples, dungeons inside a Zelda game. I think what was told was fire, water, maybe air. I'm not sure, but anyway, that you would go into different temples. It's not just one, and it was described to me as a cross between a video game, an escape room, and a puzzle theater. Now, I don't know how any of those go together. We've had some suggestions sent from fans, but just know that I don't believe right now that this is based on any particular game. I think they're attempting to do something new, which is to bring you into the game world of Zelda and have you do an adventure just like Link, only in a theme park. However, that actually would play out.
Okay. Spoiler. This is due to the fact that the story of Tears of the Kingdom seems to be a retcon of the Ocarina of Time storyline, which I have issues with. But because I trust Nintendo to respect its legacy 1,000 times more than Disney, I can accept that this is somewhat necessary to move the franchise forward. So why wouldn't Nintendo want the Zelda theme park to be based on the new direction of the franchise? And yes, the irony of KK and Galaxy's Edge comparisons is not lost on me.
Lauren, one of the coolest things that I've been told may happen with this Zelda expansion, and by the way, if it comes, it will likely go to some of the other parks specifically. We've talked here about Universal Europe, a new Universal Studios park that we believe is in development. But we think that this will go to other places. Now, there's some parks that are harder to do. Universal Studios Hollywood is very tight on real estate and land. But one of the coolest things that was told to me that was in design, who knows if it will come to fruition, but was the idea that just like you can go get your own wand at the Wizarding World of Harry Potter, that you'll be able to go get your own ocarina, and that then you can play that ocarina at different places, different stations inside this land, and maybe even beyond, maybe in different places inside all of Universal Studios. But that by playing certain tunes at different locations inside the Zelda expansion, that little animatronics or different special effects will happen. And I just thought that was a very cool idea, and I could see people, paying a significant amount, a premium amount, to get to have their own ocarina. And I don't know if it would be real or if it would be like electronic. I don't know how that would work, but uh, I just see that as being a major selling point.
If it has to be played correctly, it would almost certainly have to be electronic because otherwise you're going to have people squeaking and honking all over the place and not able to activate the interactive
Well, How
experience.
how cool do you remember you remember the N64 controller, right? And the buttons that you pressed.
Yep.
How cool would it be if these ocarinas had those same, not the exact same, but looking similar, the buttons on there, and you could actually, from muscle memory, play those same songs if you learned them way back when.
One thing that could be fun to do with these things too is that if you wanted to personalize them in some way, have them painted or something.
Oh yeah,
That's another add-on that you could throw on there and make the park a little more money.
very cool. Lauren, let's take Big Daddy MRI now.
You got it. What do you all think Nelson Pelt's next steps will be? Will he bide his time and take action when the mismanagement is at its apex, or will he pounce very soon?
Lauren, I've talked enough for a moment. Why don't you take this one?
Um, it's kind of tricky to tell because I don't know that he can take any real direct action until the next annual shareholders meeting when potentially things would come up for a proxy vote again. And I don't even know if that would happen at that point either. It's not an annual thing. It's when the composition of the board is in question, right?
Yes, and I would say this: if you think Peltz is happy right now, think again.
No,
And
certainly not.
Perlmutter. And here's the other person who you've got to start watching. You got to start watching Eisner. Does he begin to forecast that he's unhappy and might do something about it because he owns a massive number of shares. He was very positive when Iger came back, but it's starting to look like a number of major individuals and institutions are beginning to lose confidence in Iger quickly. He has not performed very well so far in either of his two big meetings. So there's
So
that.
if he cannot, for instance, try and force a position on the board next year because the composition is not in question, is the play then to just buy an enormous amount of shares in order to try and effect a hostile takeover?
Well, so there are a number of things that he could do, and it sort of depends on who becomes part of his alliance. So it doesn't just have to be the Trian group. It can he can involve many other entities, and he could still attempt to get on the board. It would be more difficult now, but he could still attempt to do so, or get anyone else on the board, perhaps someone who is more amenable to the company. But I think what we look for in terms of next steps is does Peltz or anybody else that has a significant role to play, do they begin to publicly criticize or offer suggestions for what should happen? And if we see that, then we'll know that the rift is becoming something manifest rather than just rumored.
So I would say I want to see the stock price get down to 70. I don't think it will, but I would love to see it get there because I know that's when everybody would be panicking.
Well,
My
we're at a
question for
5-year
you,
low, so that's pretty well near panic.
what is the number that you think it has to get to before they start taking obvious action?
I think we're there. I think they are taking obvious action. I mean, they just closed a a brand new hotel that will now be an eyesore for the company for everybody who sees it, and the signage at the resort. Um, they are battling legally an entire state in a conflict that they almost certainly cannot win. They are cutting content from Disney Plus, including content that again is a black eye for them to cut. They are, uh, I mean, they are scrounging for every penny they can find. They are not well, and they've just done 3 rounds of layoffs, which I don't suspect, although I don't know this to be true yet, but I don't suspect that this is the end of the layoffs, and I don't suspect this is the end of the content cuts for their streaming platform. So, I mean, we're there. We are in the eye of the hurricane, but it gets worse if the stock continues to drop.
So my question is predicated on the idea, though, that a large part of their woes right now is that they continue to double and triple and quadruple down on agenda-based storytelling. When do you
Yes.
think they abandon that push?
Well, they're stuck again because in the pipeline of content, it takes years to flush all of this out. And so, for example, you brought up the movie Elemental. I mean, there's no fixing that. They're just stuck with it. And next year's roster of content, there's probably no fixing it. Uh, luckily for Disney, luckily there's a writer's strike that gives them a chance to reconfigure and update what they're going to do. It was very interesting to see the Chinese government criticizing Disney because that will send a shiver through their spine, even if I think that the Chinese government is disingenuine about what they're doing. Disney, on the other hand, they'll cower and do whatever it takes to make the Chinese government happy. I think they treat the Chinese government better than they treat the red states in the United States, but that's another topic for another day. All right. Well, Lauren, let's move to Michelle C. Unless you have another thought on that one.
Nope.
All right.
If The Little Mermaid loses money and Disney doesn't have any other great ideas to increase cash flow, is there a chance that they could not be able to buy Hulu, or is it just a matter of borrowing the money, even with a downgrade?
Well, they're in a bad situation here. I mean, this and the media is not yet covering it. That's why you come to this channel. We cover it before the media is ready to. They come to us to find out what it is they're going to cover the next day. When it comes to this Hulu situation, Comcast is saying it's worth over $70 billion. Disney has to buy a third of it, or Comcast would have to agree to buy two-thirds of it, or Comcast can call Disney on it, which would essentially mean Disney has to pay up. Now, Universal Base, or no, excuse me, Comcast essentially is not going to buy this any longer. That's off the table. So Disney's on the hook. And Disney does not have the funds currently to do this. They will have to then acquire funds somehow. And that's why you're seeing this scramble by the company trying to shore up any way they can. I mean, they're putting everything that they can possibly put for a tax write down on the books. And you even see that they are now trying to assess that the Galactic Star Cruiser will have a depreciation for a tax write down of like $150 million. So they're trying very hard to find every penny possible, and it'll be interesting to see how the media covers that as it becomes more and more difficult to avoid.
Question. In all
Yes.
in all honesty, how much do you believe your source is telling you?
Oh, sorry. I was thinking that was a question from you, Lauren. Let's go back
No,
to it. From Liam Lionheart.
no, sorry. I question everything. Due to a few things, I'll be watching instead. Not sure what that part means.
So we have a number of sources at different levels with different connections and abilities to gather information. Um, I don't know. I don't know which item you're feeling skeptical about. Although I encourage you to be skeptical about all of it. So I don't know how to answer that other than we're very careful with our sources, and we vet them extremely well. And I'll give one example of this without giving away this person. Well, I'll give two examples. There's one individual who has the ability to let us know what's going on way ahead of time across a number of different companies. It's a unique thing, and there are about three or four of us who know the individual's identity, and we protect it very, very carefully because their career would be at stake, and we'll never reveal that source. Um, Another source, Jonas and I met with.
Sorry about that.
All good. Hang on a second. We'll do a pause so I know to start over. Another source that we have has major connections all throughout the Disney company. And Jonas and I met with this individual, both of us personally, and did the vetting that was necessary. And so, what I would recommend is just watch this channel over a period of time, judge for yourself the track record. And then the other thing is that at the end of this year, I'm going to bring in a third party. That third party is going to go through everything that is in the rumors and leak playlist. So everything that we deal with that's not for sure, we're covering all of these kinds of things. That goes into rumors and leaks playlist on the channel. And at the end of the year, we're going to audit that, and we're going to tell you what percentage of those leaks and rumors were either confirmed, not yet confirmed, or were untrue. And so you'll get a score for this channel for this year, and I hope to do that every year going forward. I think it would be a lot of fun. Lauren, any thoughts?
No, I mean, I'm not personally in contact with any of the sources directly. I just uh, hear
We're going to
about these
connect you at
things.
some point. That would be a lot of fun. We need to connect you with with a Lucasfilm source, and they'll be
Yeah,
blown away. They'll be like,
yeah.
"Who is this guy? He's a genius. Why does he not work here?"
Well, this is one of the things that I have to tell people sometimes is that I am not a guy who deals with any kind of sources at all. I'm just a dude who's a fan who just follows all of this stuff obsessively. So my position here in the organization is pretty much just to give my opinions and advice where possible. I know that based on what I do know of the sources that you've told me about, they would be in a position to know the kind of things that they are telling us if they're telling the truth, and I have no reason at present to believe that they are not doing that. So I have faith in them, but I have no direct knowledge of them. So
Well,
as
let me take a moment to brag on Jonas. So, I have been known for getting some of these sources for years now, way before this channel started. But I have to say, Jonas J. Campbell, he blows me away with his ability, and I don't know what it is. I don't know how he does this. His ability to call or to communicate with major players in entertainment, in in legal circles, in politics, etc. His ability to reach these huge sources and have them just open up to him. I don't know what magic it is he has. And I will say this, and I mean this, people would not believe, people would not believe some of the sources that Jonas has acquired for us. I'm talking about, like, I still can't believe it. So kudos to Jonas. He does an incredible, incredible job. He is also a person of integrity. I mean, I really do think that he is tremendously honest. And folks out there, super chat at him, force him into a position, where he has to answer not who the sources are. He'll never say that, but make him say whether or not they are huge sources that would blow people away. I think he'll be stuck saying, "Yeah, they are." So it's something to watch. I mean, he's a wunderkind out there.
Yeah.
All right, Lauren, let's take Descripto.
I just watched The Offer, an awesome Paramount series about the troubled production of the Godfather film. Do you think that a TV/streaming series about the troubled productions of the last Marvel films may be more successful than the films themselves?
I love this question. In terms of the Eternals, yeah, it would be. It would be more successful than the Eternals. How could it not? Can we
um,
include She-Hulk? Can She-Hulk stand in as a film for a moment? Because then, yes, easily as well.
it's an interesting question because it's like I think it depends on how it would be done. I mean, if you were going to go with a straight documentary, I think that would have a niche audience, of people like us who are film fans and things like that.
Lauren, they
If you
could just get Victoria Alonso and tell her, burn it to the ground, do the documentary on how this all played out. I mean, she'll be
well,
biased, but it'll be a lot of fun.
I was thinking if you went for something like a dramedy, if you actually if you weren't doing a straight documentary, but doing a send up of what's happened there, that could maybe work. That could be fun.
It could, and I hope that if that's successful, we get a documentary about how it is they managed to get the Flash onto screens and get Ezra Miller to
Isn't
behave long enough for it to happen.
isn't that astounding? I've been absolutely shocked that
I think they sent Ezra Miller to like some sort of isolated island in the middle of the Pacific where nothing could possibly occur until they could get this thing out. That's all I can come up with.
I'm just shocked that so far, at least reaction to the trailers and everything seems to be remarkably positive. And so, I mean, I know a trailer can definitely give you a different signal than what the movie's going to be, but it sounds like the movie might be good.
Hey, I mean, I'm definitely going to go see it. We'll do a review. Lauren, if you want to go watch it on the opening day and join in on the review, we'd love to have you.
All right.
All right, let's go to
Uh,
reply by mail.
did Josh D'Amaro go against Disney PR department when contradicted Iger on Star Cruiser's 17 billion Nona Lake, and is he positioning himself as a leader/slash CEO?
Well, he's definitely positioning himself in such a way as to become the future CEO of the company. Of course, Dana Walden would like to prevent that. There are a few others who also are in contention, but Josh D'Amaro and Dana Walden, I believe, are your top candidates for the job. I don't know that he necessarily went against Iger. He more or less exposed Iger because, in terms of saying why the Star Cruiser was closing, he said that it was a change in leadership. And well, that means that Chapek is out and Iger is in, and that means that Iger made the call to shut this thing down. I don't know that it's actually a change in leadership. It's the real reason. I think it's that the company is scrambling to get money to buy Hulu, and that was their best option. They can't float a hotel that's losing money consistently. Lauren, any
Yeah,
thoughts?
well, I think it's interesting that Josh, this is not the first time that he's gone out and said something that is positioning himself as being maybe a larger player than he would currently be portrayed to be. He's definitely trying to set himself up in that position. I think it's really interesting that he's confident enough to do that without seeming to be afraid of being smacked down in any way.
Josh D'Amaro is an interesting character. He was beloved for a while. Then he presided over really poorly received decisions at the parks, but he has tried to be like Teflon and not receive those criticisms. He is a very charismatic person. He's in the same mold as Iger in that regard. But at the same time, the parks may not continue to be highly successful. May not matter though. If the rest of the company goes down at the same time, he can deflect that blame to someone else. And so it's going to be very interesting. It's also going to be interesting to see, will the company actually put him as the CEO at a time when it seems like the company is determined to do everything in the most diverse way possible. So in that case, Dana Walden is probably your leading candidate. All right, let's head
Yep.
over to Indy Phantom.
How does Disney determine which remakes go theatrical or direct to Disney Plus? You think it is predetermined based on IP interest? The budget seems so high for Pinocchio, etc.
Lauren, if you want a first shot on this one, have at it.
I don't really know. I haven't paid attention so much to how they make the determination of what goes where. My gut feeling is that they feel like if the box office figures that their projections are going to embarrass them, then it's going to go to Disney Plus. And I
That's
think
exactly right.
that's probably a smart move. It's like you don't want to admit that you're doing poorly if you can possibly avoid it.
And you don't
And
want to embarrass Tom Hanks either.
yeah, and the way that the theatrical productions work is that they have to disclose what the box office returns are. So
And we've had examples of in real time seeing the company scrap theatrical plans. We saw that with Turning Red, where at the last minute they pulled the plug and put it on streaming. It just comes down to trying to save face. They do have the desire to put a certain amount of exclusive content on the Disney Plus, but because they have not been able to maintain consistent high quality production on these things, it has tended to be that they put the content that will most embarrass them onto Disney Plus. Now that's not been I mean they haven't been able to do that with all of it because frankly, they have had a dearth of good content. I mean, when you're having to put the Eternals out onto a theatrical run and it bombs like it has. Now I know that's not a live action remake, but when you have to do that, you're not making great content that you're confident in. And so with these remakes, for example, The Little Mermaid, they put themselves through their marketing where they used ethnicity as a shield. They put themselves in such a position that there's no way they could possibly put it on Disney Plus. And at the same time, it makes them almost no money at all to put these things on Disney Plus because there's other than growing subscribers, which clearly that's not happening. They're losing subscribers in North America. Um, unless it grows the service via subscribers, it serves no financial purpose that I can see.
yeah, I do think that you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think when Turning Red came out, they had the luxury of having an excuse of the pandemic at the time, and that's no
Yes,
longer a factor there. They could at least try and provide an excuse to hide what they were doing, but that's not going to play anymore. You can probably figure that if they have sunk money into a production and it goes straight to Disney Plus, they're embarrassed about it internally.
you bet. I think you're exactly right. Now, Lauren, I'm going to read this last one because I want you to answer this one. It is such an intriguing question, and I love that Jay sent it our way. It says, who would buy Star Wars right now if Disney had to sell it? And for what price, bankruptcy or not? Let me say this, Lauren, before you answer. This is theoretical. We I do not believe that Disney will ever sell Star Wars. But that said, if in a hypothetical world this were to occur, who would be willing to buy it, Lauren?
Well, it's an interesting question because it's similar to the question that we've had of if KK were to leave, who would want to come in and fix the mess? So I think there's actually two different questions here. Who would want to buy it? Anybody. It's an IP. And anybody that's got any money is going to want to have it because it's an asset that they could then license. It's got value, even if the value's diminished. The question I think you mean is who would want to fix it? And I think that's an entirely
Oh
different
well,
question.
if you bought it, it's very easy to fix it. You just say everything Disney did is crap and it's no longer canon. I mean, that would be
Yeah,
the if you bought it, that's the easiest. It's tremendously more easy to fix that if you're a new company buying it than it is for Disney to fix it now.
I'm not sure I agree. And
Oh,
the reason is you're still going to have a backlash from those people who did like the sequel trilogy.
oh, but that's tiny.
And
I mean,
and
they're
the
loud, but they're
the,
tiny.
the bigger thing is though, you still have the responsibility of trying to tell a better story. And all of the assets that were on the board before are no longer there. So I think that it's valuable as a licensing entity. You could still do books, comics, and games and things like that, and those might be relatively well received. I'm not sure that you can fix the theatrical releases. I don't know how you go about doing it without making people angrier than they already are. And the thing is that any disappointment, even if it's a minor disappointment, is going to be amplified by the failures we've already had to endure. So it's going to be punished even more heavily than what the sequel trilogy was.
Well, I'm with you on most of that. I will say that if I had to guess who would buy it in this hypothetical world, probably Apple or Amazon. And for what price? I would say the value on Star Wars right now, given that Disney has damaged it, but also taking into consideration inflation and the fact that if you did an exceedingly good job, you could repair it if you had the genius to do so. I'm going to guess it's somewhere between no, maybe 5 to 6 billion. What do you think, Lauren, on the price it's worth?
Really? You think it's worth that much?
Well, it was 4 billion in the sale to Disney, and I'm going to say just based on inflation, it's probably worth that. Um, it's going to be more difficult to make it be big at this point, but I think with the right person in charge, if you let this thing sit for 5, 6, 7 years, you can kind of you could resurrect it. Let's say.
You're far more optimistic than I am. You want to know what value I put in my head?
What value do you have? 2 billion?
I put it at 1.
Oh, I gotcha. Well, what you could do is you could have a stand-in for Kathleen Kennedy in the new movie that they make, whatever it is. She could be the bad guy, and Star Wars fans would show up in droves. It doesn't even have to be her name. It can just be Darth KK. Whatever you want to do, it doesn't
I,
matter.
I
And
think
have
what you
Luke
do
be
is
the one who defeats her.
you have the captain of the Halcyon involved in a
There you
crash at the
go.
very beginning. Yeah. Yeah.
I love
Um,
it.
I think it's very badly damaged. I don't know that you recover the value that it had before. Remember that $4 billion that they paid for it, Disney's actuary said that that was too much. They paid too much for it to start with. So um, unless they were going to exploit, one way maybe you recover some of the value is you try and do something with the script treatments that George produced. But you got to remember those are treatments; those aren't scripts. I don't know I don't know that there's much that you can do. I'm willing to be open minded if some visionary does come in and manage to make it work, but I think that's a
Well, if
long
they
way.
offer it to me, I'm hiring you, Lauren. So we can make this work. We can fix it. I promise.
Time will tell, I guess.
There you go. All right, so let's go to we had member chats for the Pro Show Live. We, due to time constraints, were unable to get to them. So let's do those now. This from Tony/Tommy Tables. He says there's also a rumor floating around that John Favreau has been given the keys to the kingdom/Lucasfilm. Literally, could he be back in the wings waiting? And my answer to that is I don't believe that rumor is true. So I hate to disappoint, but I don't think that has happened. John Favreau has a company. What is it? Gollum. What is that?
Uh,
Gollum
I,
Creations.
yes, that's correct.
Gollum Creations, and so no, I don't think that he's in charge of Lucasfilm. Any thoughts, real quick, Lauren, on that one?
No, I'm in complete agreement. I did think it was interesting that there was an interview that or some type of a YouTube video that came up with him and Kevin Feige discussing the first 15 years of Marvel, and he appeared to be in good spirits there. That actually surprised me a little bit. So he's
Yeah,
still
yeah,
working. He's still working with Disney, apparently, in some kind of good capacity.
absolutely,
Um,
and he probably gets along well with Kevin Feige. So
but I mean, it's. Yeah, I don't believe he's been elevated. I really wish that he would and had been, but I just don't see it happening with the current leadership.
and perhaps in another video we'll talk about why he probably isn't being elevated right now, but we'll save that. From Rob Weisenhunt, do your sources have any info on the sudden yet persistent rumor that Mark Hamill and Hayden Christensen are set to appear as Luke and Anakin in an upcoming Star Wars film? To address that very quickly, that is from a single source, Giant Freaking Robot, which, by the way, they may be correct. We don't know. But we can't corroborate that yet. Other outlets carried that, but there's only one source originating it. And then also, on top of that, if it is true, Well, it seems to confirm what we've been reporting, that Luke and these other original trilogy characters were cobwebbed. That's a quote from Lucasfilm. We believe that they were cobwebbed. We think that's actually the terminology they use internally. And so that may make them nervous that we know that. But yeah, I think that would absolutely corroborate it, because what we've said is that Lucasfilm believes these characters can be used for cameos, but nothing more. A Force Ghost appearance is definitely a cameo. What do you think, Lauren?
Well, I think in my opinion, Lucasfilm seems to still be on pretty good terms with Hayden Christensen, and I get the impression they want to use him more. I think it would make sense to use him in Ahsoka because obviously she was his apprentice. Um, I do agree with you that if they brought them in, that would probably fit into a cameo role. But I'm still stuck on the fact that when Kathleen was asked directly, "Well, what kind of role will Luke have here?" She pretty much choked and said, "Well, he's not really going to be a major influence. I mean, his presence may be felt, but I don't think she's interested in bringing Mark back in any kind of
No,
capacity. I think if
no,
they can avoid that, they'll do it as much as they can."
I don't think they get along. I mean, I'll just be honest. So here is our final thing we need to cover. This was a super chat we missed in the Pro Show Live. This from Maverick Pilgrim. And it says, with Disney's newfound heights of toxicity, could integrating Hulu and Disney Plus lead to Hulu sub loss? And this is a fantastic super chat because, Lauren, this is what Comcast is alleging. This is what has been going on behind the scenes that we didn't even know about. Comcast is quite unhappy. They believe and have taken action against Disney behind the scenes again, just now leaking out through a Wall Street Journal report. Comcast believes that Disney has been taking actions to devalue Hulu in order to get the price down. And so, absolutely, it seems to me that cutting content could be aimed at decreasing the effectiveness, the efficacy, the subscriber numbers of Hulu in order to try to make this purchase easier on Disney. It's a fantastic super chat. Lauren, final thoughts on that one as we prepare to wrap up this video.
I think it really depends on how much of a draw the Hulu content has to their subscribers. If you're producing good content and if it remains on the service, then people tend to be loyal. Does the merger of the two lead to a Hulu loss? I don't know that that happens, but it really depends on how angry people are at Disney. That's still a little hard for me to gauge. I don't know how much of cancellation of Disney Plus subscribers is due to anger at Disney and how much of it is just due to the fact that there's a lack of content. My belief of their wanting to merge the two into a single app is probably to try and hide some of that subscriber bleed. So I think Disney believes, at least, that Hulu's got a pretty good hold.
Well, the really interesting thing too is now there are leaks, and they're extremely credible, that Disney Plus would essentially cannibalize Hulu. Hulu would simply become a blade or a pillar or a column inside Disney Plus, along with Star Wars, Marvel, Disney Animation, etc. And so uh, that does not bode well for Hulu, as over time, what purpose would it serve for Disney? You would think that eventually it would be rebranded once it served its purpose. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. It's a fantastic question. I think you're on the exact right track, Maverick Pilgrim. Now, guys, before we wrap up this video, and we've tried to go highly in depth on this, we hope you've enjoyed this kind of content. On occasion, we do this long format stuff where we dive deep into it. We hope you enjoyed it. But real quick, I just want to say something simple about Memorial Day weekend. So in my life, I had a great uncle who I never knew that when he had been in service, that he had been wounded, that he was a hero. I had no idea while he was living that he had a Purple Heart. None of this was known to me. And yet, once he passed away, and in the obituary, there it was. He had never talked about any of the heroic deeds he had done. He had never embellished or talked in grandiose terms about his own life. He lived simply. And I didn't know he had a Purple Heart. I just knew that he had a golden heart to everybody he encountered. As we go into Memorial Day weekend and Memorial Day, especially if you're watching this video on Memorial Day, I encourage all of you to not only remember those who gave everything in the line of service and remember those who have passed on, but also take consideration of how valuable and how special life is. And for those who are in your orbit of friendship and familial relationships, think about how can you let them know how much you care and love them. And I think that the best way to remember those who gave all for us to continue having freedoms is to maximize our own lives. The way to do that is to love those in our orbits, to take care of those who need us, and to live to the absolute best that you can. And I encourage this to be a day and a weekend where you recommit to being tremendous in your vivacious living this life. Make it count. Make this world better. I know that you are the type of person who can do just that. Lauren, where can people find you on this great, big, beautiful web?
You can find me on That Park Place as a writer. You can find me at Lauren Connor on Twitter and at Lauren Connor 9030 on YouTube.
Excellent. And Lauren, we love having you on the channel. You are an absolute joy and asset to everything we do here. The folks, when you're not on, they say, "Where's Lauren? Where's Lauren?" So we aim to please. Lauren's back, and we hope to have him back and back and back again. Well, folks, if you like content like this, consider clicking the like button, share, subscribe, and you can stick it to the algorithms. When you click it, we're talking about that notification bell. Drop a comment down below, and wherever you are, whatever you're doing, keep learning, keep growing, and keep having fun.